Let's move to the southern part of the continent, where a group of U.S. representatives have written a letter to the White House asking them to move this year's Africa Growth and Opportunity Summit away from South Africa. In the letter, the legislators say there is a chance that the U.S. will be excluded from AGOA because of South Africa's relationship with Russia. However, South Africa, through its Department of International Relations, says the U.S. is not looking for a replacement. Meanwhile, Justice and Correctional Service Minister Ronald Lamola is considering making legislative changes so the Russian President Vladimir Putin's possible attendance at Brics Summit in South Africa becomes a non-issue. Joining us to speak more on these developments is political analyst Gustavo de Carvalho and senior researcher at SAIIA and advocate Paul Hoffman, of course, joins us from Gauteng. Thank you so much for your time, gentlemen.
Good day. You've got me in the wrong city and the wrong organization. I'm Paul Hoffman with Accountability Now, but I can talk on the subject that you are raising, so let's not get too worried about personalities.
All right, we apologize for that. But let's start off with you, Gustavo. How is the letter, a letter like this going to land at the White House? And how, of course, how serious is this with the legislators?
There is certainly a sign in the last couple of months of a relationship between South Africa and the US that has already been fractured for some time, but essentially heightened that, specifically when it comes to the situation of the military exercises that we had in February with China and Russia, and especially with the Dapo now about the potential visit of Vladimir Putin during the Brics Summit in August. What we do need to see as well is that while there is much for South Africa to lose when it comes to, and especially in relation to AGOA and the negotiations that accounts for around 25% of South African exports to the United States, there is also much that the United States can use. That South Africa is an important country when it comes to the continent in terms of its own relationship. So I think we will be seeing already quite a few months of confusion between the two countries, and also what are the types of losses that the countries are willing to have. There are losses for South Africa, but there is certainly also losses for the United States.
All right, I want to move to you now, Paul. It seems AGOA is being used to send a very strong signal to Pretoria. What's your take?
Yes, I'm certainly concerned about the stance taken by the legislature, but the Biden administration itself is of the view that AGOA is not in jeopardy at this stage. South Africa would suffer quite seriously, especially in its automotive industry, if the advantages of AGOA membership were to be taken away because of this dalliance with the Russians that derives from Brics membership with Russia.
All right, now, I still want to stay with you, Paul, right? Just as a follow-up. Now, Justice Minister Ronald Lamola, trying to make changes to the legislation just to accommodate Putin. As a expert or professional, what does this mean? And what does this also entail? And what will even be the possible eventual outcome in case the Russian president, chooses to come to South Africa, in Brics in the coming months, for the Brics Summit in the coming months?
South Africa is a founding member of the ICC. Indeed, our late President Nelson Mandela was one of the moving spirits behind the ICC. And the ICC, the International Criminal Court, has issued a warrant for the arrest of President Putin of Russia, arising out of the activities in Ukraine since February last year. Because of the membership, the ongoing membership of South Africa, the arrest warrant would have to be executed if Putin arrived in South Africa for the Brics Summit in August, and he would have to be delivered to the ICC on pain of being in violation of obligations solemnly undertaken, not only in the Rome Statute, but also in its domestication in South African law. Now, what Lamola is trying to do at this stage, and he's not going to succeed, he doesn't even have time for it, is he's going to try and amend the legislation domesticating the ICC treaty on the basis that sovereign immunity should be given to heads of state. He has a problem because in South Africa, we have a Bill of Rights which says that everybody is equal before the law. So the doctrine of sovereign immunity is not part of our law, and an attempt to introduce it would be unconstitutional. So I'm afraid they are back to moving the venue of the Brics summit in August to a country where the ICC warrant does not apply, or of asking Mr. Putin to attend in virtual reality rather than in person in South Africa, because there's already litigation about it, and those who would wish to see him arrested are getting their ducks in a row to make sure that there's not a repetition of what happened with al-Bashir of Sudan when he visited South Africa several years ago.
All right, I want to go back to you, Gustavo, right? What other legal options are there for South Africa if, President Putin decides to attend the summit still?
I think, as Professor Hoffman mentioned, now there is very little options at this stage from a legal point of view. South Africa is a signatory of the Rome Statute, but it also confirms that much of the discussions that we're having between South Africa and the different counterparts when it comes to both the hosting of the Brics Summit, but also a lot of the conversations that are happening between South African governments and the ICC really shows that it is based in a legal one. From a legal perspective, it is very clear that South Africa has internalized the Rome Statute. It already had the situation with al-Bashir in 2015, but particularly I think that it is important to notice, especially with the ruling of the Supreme Court of Appeals of 2016, does make it much more clear in terms of what the obligations of the South African government would be. Whether it would be able to get a waiver from the ICC, very uncertain and probably unlikely at this stage. And we are seeing increasingly some of the discussions around potentially moving the summits to China. There has been conversations between President Ramaphosa and President Xi Jinping. So all of those would be part of the equation. I think the challenge that South Africa has now, apart from the need for actually upholding its own legal requirements and legal obligations, is that a decision needs to be made very fast. There is the aspect of Vladimir Putin potentially coming to South Africa, but Brics is much broader than that. We have very serious discussions happening at the Brics Summit in August this year when it comes to issues around currencies and especially when it comes to the expansion of Brics. And there is a major risk that the issue around Vladimir Putin may actually cloud many of these developments that we'll be having. So we should be expecting hope that South Africa would make a decision soon, and hopefully one that does not create an internal crisis that would be very problematic for the country.
All right, thank you so much for your time, gentlemen.